Determine essential content to cover when teaching about creation evolution. Our topics: lifelong learning tools, the Bible and creation, science. Notice I put a little qualifier there. Don't need rocket science on this, folks. When I was at NASA both times, I used 10th grade science as high as I needed to go to win the discussion. That's all I needed. Didn't have to go deep on anything. It's learning to control the conversation and putting yourself in position when you're on the offense. And then apologetics. Our challenges. Give an example of critical thinking question. Well, we have three of those. Number one. Number two.
Has it ever been observed?
Good thing you were there with me. And number three.
Are there any assumptions?
Are there any assumptions? Very good. See, we already know that one. So you already know 3/4 of this, or better than that already, don't you? So we can cut this chapter short. State 2 reasons for holding to a literal 6-day creation. State 4 areas that should be covered when teaching a section or course on creation evolution. And state why Christians should learn and practice apologetics. We actually already covered that one very early today. Anybody happen to remember the 2 scriptures? The scripture said always in it.
Always be ready.
1 Peter 3:15, we're to have a ready answer always, or in defense always. And what was the other one? It was in what chapter in Jude? No. That was a trick question. It's in verse 3. See, I have the ability to stay mean all day long. All right, let's start here. Lifelong learning tools. 3 critical thinking questions. See, I told you didn't have to write them down. How do you know it's true? Has it ever been observed? Or make any assumptions? Okay. Can anybody now give me all 3 of these? We've heard them often enough. Can anybody give me all 3 of them? Okay, go ahead.
How do you know it's true? Has it ever been observed? And are you making any assumptions?
Very good. See, I never said you can't look, did I? So it didn't make any assumptions. There's a lot of times people will look down like this. They want to look, but they don't want to look. And they'll try and get through them. I never said you can't look. You're making assumptions already, aren't you? Okay, let's start with number 1. Got through with the mouthful, didn't I? How do you know it is true? And our number 2 person. We do have a push-up corner over here.
Has it ever been observed?
Has it ever been observed? And number 3.
Are there any assumptions?
Are there any assumptions? 3 very powerful questions you can turn the whole situation around. I've used this on biology professors quite a bit. They'll tell me all about this stuff. They'll say, how do you know it's true? Has it ever been observed? Make any assumption. It just stops them in their tracks. Because I know they've never observed this. Catch them right in their bluffing. And then they're quite embarrassed at that point. In other words, when an evolutionist makes a statement, I'm going to call them on that statement. I've been in secular universities where there were no Christians. They were all in the retreat, so they brought me in to teach a section. And the professors and everybody was there. And I had one student start degrading the Bible almost right away. So I made a statement saying, no, when we're in school, we practice very good scholarship. We study things so we can talk about it. Have you read the Bible? No. And everybody got it. She had never read the Bible, so how can she talk about it? That was poor scholarship, and everybody caught it right there. There weren't many more challenges after that. So if they make a statement, I'm going to call on it. Or if they make a statement that says, oh, how can you call God good? Look at all the evil things he does. They just lose the whole argument right there. They can't win. Because, folks, that is a presuppositional challenge. And the challenge is, you made a statement, God is evil. I'd like to know what is your universal definition for distinguishing between good and evil. And the evolutionists cannot have an answer. Every answer they give, and there's only 4 they can give, ends up condoning the evil they say they don't like. And that opens the door for me to give the gospel at that point. Because only God has the difference. Because he says, I am God, I make the rules, I declare what is right. And then I go right down the list until I get to John 3:16 and John 14:6. Yes?
I was going to ask you a question on the side of the press, it's appropriate to ask, about the 3 things. Have you seen it?
How do you know it's
How
true?
do you know it's true? Is it observable?
Don't make any assumptions.
And I think those are great questions to pose to someone who believes in evolution, but
Can they use that
I
on us?
think they could definitely ask us as,
Absolutely.
and to which,
Okay.
what would you say?
Okay, let's take that, and that's a great way, because they can use that on us too, can't they? And that's a valid way to bring them. How do you know it's true? Well, the Bible says so.
Yeah.
Are you making any assumption? Never been observed? Well, no, it's never been observed, because I happen to believe by faith. Is that wrong for a Christian to say we believe by faith? No, because what does it say in the Bible? Without faith, it's impossible to please God. So don't be ashamed to say you believe that there's a greater God by faith, because the evolutionist also ultimately has to believe by faith. We do have a very powerful question in there that talks about this. We're going to come to it soon. Show me any observational evidence for evolution that does not require me to use faith. It cannot be done. So thank you for that, because both ways we have to go by faith. Now it becomes a matter of, could you tell me what your faith in evolution has to offer me? And I will tell you what my faith in Jesus Christ has to offer you.
But along that line, has it ever been observed?
We do have them.
We have eyewitness accounts.
They're dead, though.
Directly written down.
Oh, but they're dead. I'm playing the other role now.
But they wrote it down before.
And they were written by
died.
men, and men
there's-
make mistakes.
And Ernest Hemingway wrote things down, and he's dead now too,
Yes.
but we still read it.
Charles Darwin wrote a lot of things down were wrong also.
And we still.
However, what does the Bible tell us in Romans 1:19-20? God has given us all the evidence. We have no excuse. In other words, from a Christian viewpoint, we are the only ones that have observable evidence to really support what we say.
right.
Because what does every kind produce after itself?
Same
Same
kind.
kind. Has anybody ever observed anything different? Has anybody ever observed millions of years? Has anybody ever observed one creature changing into another? Because what is the fossil record? It's an interpretation, not observed. Evolution has never, ever been observed. Now I'm talking about Darwinian evolution, amoeba to man. I don't let them get away with this thing called microevolution, because it is not evolution at all. It is variety within kind. What allows us to do that is the information that's already pre-programmed into our DNA.
It's natural selection.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
We don't use the word, now natural selection is what the evolutionists will call it. But we will not use the word or term natural selection. Because once you do, from an evolutionist viewpoint, you've just bought into evolutionism. Natural selection, what does the word natural mean? Without man, without God. What does selection mean? There's a selector, which implies what? Intelligence. So what are we saying? What is evolution saying? God did not do all the design, man did not do all the design. Something created all the design in living creatures, and it wasn't God.
But those are all assumptions that you're making there.
No, this is what the evolutionists actually believe.
But I don't doubt they believe it, but they believe in evolution too.
Yes, but this in their mind is what they will say. So if you say, if they ask you a question, do you believe in natural selection? You say yes. In their mind, you now have bought into evolution. Now, what you do is you ask them 3 questions. There's that 3 again. Can I give you the 3 questions? Now, I don't think they're in the book. I don't think they're in the book here. So this is added in at no cost.
Wow.
3 questions. When somebody says, do you believe in natural selection? Question number 1. Can you help me understand what you mean by natural selection and how does it work? What is it and how does it work? That for the first time, maybe not first time, but in most cases for the first time in their life, they will actually have to think about what they were taught about natural selection. They're just told natural selection causes evolution, but never taught really what is happening there. They say, oh, it selects good mutations to get rid of the bad ones. Well, that doesn't tell me really how it works, what the intelligence is doing. How does it make that decision? Second question. Since selection implies intelligence, being a selector, could you tell me who or what is your intelligent selector? In other words, who or what is actually doing the selection there? Well, Charles Darwin didn't have a clue. He didn't have a clue, folks. Charles Darwin thought the environment had intelligence. I didn't know when heat, rocks, or dirt had intelligence. Did you? The environment has no intelligence to do any selecting at all. And some of our teachers today are still saying it's the environment that does the selection. Folks, that is terrible science. Absolutely terrible science. Now, if they give the right answer, they're also in trouble. Isn't that wonderful? They are in a lose-lose situation because of their belief system. Because the correct answer is the information that's already in our DNA that allows us to adjust to our environment. Let me give an example. Anybody know where Pikes Peak is? Colorado. Anybody know how high it is? 14,110 feet. 300 feet shorter than Mount Rainier. So we got something taller here, don't we? So we can brag about that. Go to the top of Pikes Peak. There's a road that goes all the way up there. In the summertime, there's no snow up there a lot of times. And you go up top Pikes Peak, 14,110 feet, and you start running all around. What's going to happen to you? You're going to be out of breath. You're also going to get very sick and maybe pass out. Why? The air is very thin up there. I've been up there. Anybody been at top Pikes Peak? I've only been up there, I've ran up there. What a stupid guy this guy is. You didn't get that on camera, did you? Yeah, there actually is a race that goes up there. But I was running 100 miles a week to prepare for that. So I didn't get any altitude sickness. So you get up there, and you stay up there for a couple of months, then you run all around again. What happens? You don't get tired. Why is that? Did the environment make any selection in you? No. The environment is nothing more than something you get exposed to. It's the information that's already in your DNA that allowed you to adjust to that environment. The environment didn't do anything. It can't select anything. It has no intelligence. Somebody had to pre-program all that information in your DNA so that you could adjust to heat, cold, or high altitude, or other situations. So now we come to question number 3, which puts them in a lose-lose situation. It's a little longer one. Can you show me any observational evidence? Show me any observational evidence for where that vast amount of information in our DNA came from. Show me any observational evidence where that vast amount of information in our DNA came from that does not require me to use faith. Now, we know we have to believe by faith. What we're demonstrating is the evolutionists must also accept what they believe by faith. So that was a great question to ask there. I'd take 20 push-ups off on that one. That's a good one.
I might have a related question to that.
No. Well, go ahead anyway.
Along the same lines, but if we tell the evolutionists that yes, there was an observer, the Creator was there,
That's right.
and because we go by the Bible, so we have an observer.
Yes, we do. But they don't believe that. They don't believe that. But you know, we're not there to win the argument, are we?
No.
Now, how can they answer that last question? They can't. The only thing they have is, well, over millions of years of mutation. Has anybody ever observed millions of years? No. It's a faith issue. Has anybody ever observed mutations adding new genetic information? No. It's never been done.
But they have observed mutations losing
Right.
genetic.
Mutations will either cause a loss of information or functionality or have no great effect at all. But no known information has ever added new genetic information. This is a death blow to the evolution model. What they will do, though, is bluff their way through with examples that are completely wrong. And they'll get away with it because they have their students held captive. Yes?
So some potentially new information might be, for instance, some families have 6 fingers instead of 5. It looks like new information.
But it's not. It's redundant information. It's kind of like writing a paper and then making a copy of it. Is there anything new in the copy? Nothing. And that's what they'll use. And our students don't know the difference a lot of times. Can you see the value of training our Christian students who attend public schools how to ask good science questions? And get 2 or 3 in the class. This is what we did about 12 years ago. John, you remember that. And they raised their hand and asked a good science question. And the teacher didn't know how to answer it. Then another student raises their hand and asks another question. The teacher doesn't know how to answer it about evolution. What a witness that will be to the other students in class. You see the capability we have here? God has given us all the tools we need. We just haven't used them, have we? The church is too much on the defense or not even in the battle. It starts at home, though, doesn't it? The parents are the #1 teacher in a child's life. Don't give that away to anybody. Doesn't mean you don't send your children to Christian schools or other places, but remember your primary responsibility, you're the #1 educator in your child's life. You can enhance that, help that with co-ops, Christian schools. Now, not all Christian schools are biblical, are they? Not all Christian schools in this area believe in a 6-day creation. I won't name them. So we have our #1, yes?
At the risk of push-ups, could you repeat that second question?
Second question.
Who does the selection?
Selection implies intelligence. Who or what is doing your selection, or who is your intelligence? Selection implies intelligence. Who or what is your intelligent selector?
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's not push-ups. Because I go pretty fast. You ought to see me when I do lectures. I've been accused of not breathing. That's my speech impediment. I get excited about this stuff. You know, I teach the same thing 100 times. I'm just excited the 100th time. Because people out there are hearing it for the first time.
And it makes sitting in here all day very bearable. I'll tell you, yes, last night I'm thinking, wow, it's going to be a nice day. I'm going to be in there all day long. And look, it's already 3:50.
You know what I was thinking? The same thing.
But your excitement is what you're teaching.
Yes, it is. It's too exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
Plus, what an opportunity to give this many people and harass them all day long. That's what we look forward to.
Yeah. And your comment a second ago, I had said in the hallway was, this could be titled parenting. You know, this is, I want to go back and re-raise all my children. This is good stuff.
And don't worry, someday you'll get grandchildren, you have a
I
whole
have
second
one
time.
already, I have one already,
Oh,
it's
do
one
you?
reason
Wow.
I'm here.
Okay. And it's fun to corrupt them, isn't it? Teach them how to be tricky and get even with your children.
Yeah.
That's the fun part of grandparenting, isn't it? Okay, now that we got #1, #2, and #3, then we sneak in #4. How many times have we heard #1, #2, and #3? Whole bunch of times. Now, I won't do this, but I could call in anybody here and you give me all 3 of them, wouldn't you?
No.
Just like you're not tired, are you?
No.
Now, let me hear it. You're not tired, are you?
No.
Okay. When are we supposed to take our next break?
No.
It's about, what? Let's go about 25 till. We'll take a break. Take us plenty of time. I get carried away and forget about the time. That's why I have 25 till. Okay, you'll let me know? Okay, good. 4th question. How much of the fossil was actually found and how much was drawn in by the artist? Or how much was added or assumed? Because the pictures they're seeing in the textbooks are largely drawn by artists. Specifically when they give a list or a whole sequence of transitions. This is a very powerful question. How much of the fossil was actually found and how much was drawn in by the artist? See, most students don't know this. They just think that's what was found. Therefore, that is powerful evidence for evolution. Do we use any scientific terms in here? Really not. This is why I call these lifelong learning tools. They don't only work against evolution, they can work against other Christians who have belief systems or any area. How do you know it's true? Has it ever been observed? Do you make any assumptions? Let me show you an example. Examples. Facilitators. That was a land creature, like a wolf, that was evolving into a whale. And that's what they teach in the schools. And they have a picture in there. This is the picture sometimes they'll show, or they'll show the entire creature. But what you don't know is only the shaded portions of the skull were found. None of the rest of the body was found in the rest of the skull. Only the shaded portions. And they had this big picture drawn in the textbook. Here's Pakicetus, a transition between a wolf and a whale. That is terrible science they're doing. That is complete deception. That is what's happening in our state-run schools. They are deliberately deceiving our students into believing evolution. In other words, it is the evolutionists who end up being afraid of science because they're unwilling to teach the real science anymore. It's a dangerous place for our students to be today because they're not equipped for what's going to hit them. Then we had, where did this one, anybody know where this one came from? A tooth, a single tooth?
Help down, man.
No, Nebraska man, close. Nebraska man. Okay, here's your,
Pigs too.
I'm going to show you how easy anthropology is. Anthropology is really easy. Anybody want to volunteer for this? Do I have any volunteers to answer this question? Oh, thank you, thank you. Where did they find Nebraska man?
Nebraska.
Good. See? That anthropology easy. And they had the entire creature Nebraska man, his wife and family on display. And all they found was a tooth. And the tooth was not an ape's tooth, it was not a human's tooth, it ended up being a pig's tooth. It was the first time a pig ever made a monkey out of a man. Anybody here from Nebraska? Okay, good. I got to do this then. If this is what they were teaching at the University of Nebraska, the fact of Nebraska man, then what does the N stand for on their football helmets? Knowledge. I do that in high schools and half of them don't get it. And then we had this famous creature here, Archaeoraptor. The big transition between dinosaur and bird ended up being a fraud. First of all, they smuggled the bones out of China. Secondly, they pasted on feather imprints onto it. And there was 6 pages in National Geographic, The Fact of Evolution. This is what evolution is about. And our students don't have a chance unless they're taught.
Well, you missed Piltdown Man.
Yeah, I only have time for a Piltdown Man. It's a whole different one. That was a hoax.
Yeah.
That turned out for 50 years. It lasted in our school textbooks. That's the fact of evolution. The whole thing was a hoax. Somebody had chemically stained bones and filed the teeth down to make them fit. And that was evolution. Okay, can anybody give me all 3 critical thinking questions? Okay,
How do you know it's true? Has it ever been observed? Are there any assumptions?
and she did not even look, did you?
No.
She did not. Wow. I would take 30 off for that one, not even
Oh,
look.
yay. Only
I'll add 10
70
more
to
on
go.
because I didn't say you couldn't look. But thank you for that. I know it's true. Has it ever been observed? Make any assumptions. Now we get to another one called the power question. And we've already had this one. Show me any observational evidence for evolution that's not requiring me to use faith. Keywords are observational and faith. Then you can wrap your words around it however you want. Can the evolutionists produce any observational evidence for Darwinian evolution? Can they produce any at all? No, they cannot. That means they must ultimately accept by faith. If that's true, then how do they get away with teaching it in states as a fact?
Because it's the way to explain away everything there is apart from God.
That's right. What is the ultimate purpose of evolutionism? To do away with Jesus Christ.
Do away with God.
Eliminate God altogether. Eliminate God from public view. And we send our students to be trained that way. Now do you start to see the danger of public education? And it's not just that. It's the whole moral relativism. It's the immorality that goes on there. And the lack of respect all the way through. How many have been in public schools lately and see what goes on? You won't want to send your children there. Now, there are exceptions where some public schools are not as bad as others. Notice how I said that? Not as bad as others. They're still in there teaching evolution as a fact, billions of years, which is directly opposed to the very words of Jesus Christ. In Mark 10, verse 6, Jesus Christ made this statement. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. Mark 10, verse 6. In other words, Jesus Christ is telling us man and woman were on the planet from the beginning of creation, not after millions of years. Is he wrong? So if you're believing millions of years, you're saying Jesus Christ is wrong there. We have a major problem. Yes?
Yeah, could we apply this power question also to the Big Bang?
Absolutely. Show me any observational evidence for the Big Bang that does not require me to use faith. They only have one possibility, it's not right either, cosmic background radiation.
Right.
But the whole Big Bang was adjusted because when originally predicted the cosmic background radiation, they were magnitudes off. They readjusted the Big Bang to fit the model. Notice the Big Bang is like Jello. It keeps changing all the time. Now, another thing I teach is called fuzzy words. Fuzzy words and magic words. How many learned about fuzzy words and magic words in their English class? You think so? Now,
A long time ago.
I'm not talking abracadabra now. Fuzzy words and magic words. Fuzzy words. We believe, we think, must have, could have, might have, our opinions, we guess over millions of years. Well, what's so fuzzy about those? What they indicate is no observational evidence. Now, it's not wrong to use words like this in scientific articles. But what it tells us is they do not have the observable evidence. Let's take an example here. Here's some magic words. Appeared, emerged, arose, gave rise to, was on the way to becoming, burst on the scene, evolved itself, was making a transition to. Those are all magic words. In other words, I'd like to know how it happened. Don't just tell me they arose or they burst onto the scene. I'd like to know how it happened, rather than waving a magic wand. Where do I find a lot of these words? In science textbooks. Very good.
Mike, I have a question for you. About the fuzzy words.
Yes.
The very first one, we don't have to be careful here because we believe. And so could I throw that back at us?
Sure. Well, it's okay to use these words, but just remember what they mean. We believe by faith, don't we? Mm-hmm. It says, by faith we understand. And we blew that. So we're okay with that.
Okay.
But for the evolutionists, they think it's a fact. And it's not. It's a faith.
And they're putting it in our children's heads.
Yes, yes, they are. And you see it on TV all the time, in the movies all the time. Let's take a life science textbook here, grade 7. Paleontologists think that Archaeopteryx and today's birds descend from some kind of reptile, possibly from a dinosaur. Quote, right from a textbook. Think that. That means they're not really sure, are they? Some kind of reptile. They're not even sure which one it was for them. Then here's your real scientific word, possibly. Did anybody see any facts in here? This is what you call fuzzy. No observational evidence. They're not even sure about this. But yet, when they teach it, it sounds so good it must be a fact. Dinosaurs did evolve into birds. Here's another one from USA Today. There are likely tens of billions of Earth-like planets in our Milky Way galaxy. In fact, the nearest Earth-like planet may be only 12 light years away. And with a universe of hundreds of billions of galaxies, our entire universe must contain billions of Earth-like planets. There are likely. What does that tell you? There may not be likely.
And yet there must be.
Yes. Maybe. Maybe not. Must contain. Why must they contain? Where's the evidence? And then you can also add billions. Have we seen billions of Earth-like planets? No, we haven't. Not even close, folks. We found a lot of extrasolar planets, but none of them we found are really Earth-like. And in fact, what we're seeing out there in these extrasolar solar systems, they're all the opposite of our solar system, which just blows up the whole evolution model of how a solar system's supposed to evolve. Yes?
I was just going to say, don't you love the part that says, in fact,
Yes.
the nearest Earth-like planet maybe?
Yes. Yes. Kind of a little contradiction in their statement there. But when you train students to find these words, they don't have to understand all the science in the journal they're looking at. They can see the whole thing has no observational evidence to support it. It's very fuzzy. train our students for lifelong learning tools here. The critical thinking questions, the fuzzy words and magic words. They'll never read the same way again, a science journal. I've had students come back with me a year or 2 years later telling me exactly that. I love to read these articles now looking for these words.
Is that a typo on the date?
Pardon?
Is that a typo on the date?
It's just
10/13, should be 2013?
How do you know it's not 10:13? That would be what you call a Microsoft PowerPoint error, certainly not an operator error. I'm sure they'll fix this in the next release of PowerPoint, won't they? You can't expect me to take the blame for anything, can you? Thank you for that. Then we go to red flag words. Everybody, no real scientist. I think, truth, fundamentalist, intolerant. Those first several express an absolute, don't they? I thought in moral relativism, there are no absolutes. But yet, here's a person, when they use these words, they're giving an absolute. In other words, they're putting themselves up as the authority or the lawmaker. Who gave them that privilege to be the lawmaker or the authority? Have they really examined and shown that everybody believes this way? Or all real scientists, I've actually had people use this in me. All real scientists believe in evolution. How would you respond to that? Well, what do you define as a real scientist? Well, it comes down to people that believe like them. In other words, they're making up the rules as they go by. Or I think, truth, that expresses a personal opinion or idea, not a fact at all. And then we have the last one, reference to being closed-minded. Why are you Christians so intolerant of a woman's right to choose? Why are you intolerant to my alleged intolerance? That's how you respond to that one. You see, the most intolerant group of people we find at universities. They practice and teach intolerance. Because they can only be tolerant if you believe like them. You're intolerant if you don't believe. So they're the biggest ones that are intolerant, right there. Also, the greatest source of censorship in this country is the public education system. Red flag statements. People should decide for themselves what is right and wrong. Okay, I just decided that what you said is wrong. So why is their statement correct there? What gives them the right to be the lawmaker? We should decide for ourselves what is right and wrong. Well, I just decided everything you said is wrong. You see, that's what moral relativism is about. It is a self-defeating philosophy. No one has the whole truth, including you. See, that there itself is a truth statement, isn't it? So if no one has the whole truth, then why should I believe what you just said? I was in a discussion with an older brother who is what I call an anti-theist, hates God, hates anything about creation and Christianity. He was rather argumentative and being rather loud and boisterous. And every once in a while I took a breath and I asked him a question, or I caught him on a logical fallacy, which even got him more angry, because he went through a whole list of logical fallacies and called him on everyone. So finally he said this, and it ended everything. He said, I guess we can't know anything for sure. And I responded, then how can I trust anything you just said? And he had no response. Moral relativism is a self-defeating philosophy. This is how we need to teach our students to respond to things like this. Or how about the professor? And they do this. And I've heard this done, believe it or not, John, in a math class in San Diego. The professor stood up there in a math class and said, there are no absolutes. What does that open you to do on your test then? Give any answer you want. There are no absolutes itself is an absolute statement. Are you absolutely sure there are no absolutes? It is a self-defeating philosophy, but yet they get away with this in the universities. Why? Because they hold their students captive by threatening their grades. That's true for you, but not for me. Same philosophy there. That's just your opinion. That usually comes out from within Christian University. Christian University professors use this on me a lot. And it usually comes talking about the days of creation. I will talk about the days of creation being literal days, 24-hour periods. And they'll come on and say, that's just your opinion. Well, there are a couple ways to answer that. Number one is, I'm glad you agree with me. The days were literal. That's not what I said. That's how I interpreted what you said. You see, no, besides that's just your opinion, they can say that's just your interpretation. Well, if we can't understand the plain reading of language in context, then how can we have any rules in language at all? That's just your interpretation? Then I interpret what you just said as you agree with me. That's the more rude way of saying it. Or the other way is, I was able to support my view using just the Bible. Can you support your view of millions of years using just the Bible? They call themselves a Christian. They should learn to use the Bible. But you know what they do? They avoid the Bible at all costs. What does that tell me about their biblical worldview? They don't have it to. They're really, remember, heart, soul, and mind? Their mind is still given over to the world. They haven't renewed it yet. And yet, they're in their teaching our students. That's the danger of many of our Christian universities today. Before we send our children to Christian universities, we should sit down and ask some very pointed questions. Not just, do you believe in a 6-day creation? Because they'll say yes, meaning 6 millions of years. You need to ask, do you believe in a literal 6-day, 24-hour creation period? Do you believe in a real worldwide flood? Because folks, if they get that part wrong, they've got a lot of other parts also wrong. And they're the professors teaching our children. And we're sending our children to these Christian universities thinking they're going to come out of there believing the Bible. And many are leaving the church. Be careful of how we spend our money getting education. Words and definitions. Words can depict reality as it really is, or we can twist it, can't we? Did you know 9 out of 10 doctors recommend this miracle cure? First of all, what kind of doctors am I talking about? And that's an appeal to what? Authority. That's a logical fallacy appealing to authority, which doesn't always have to be a logical fallacy, as long as you define who are those 9 out of 10 doctors. Clarifying the meaning of words alone can diffuse many objections. Classical scientists, the old classical scientists, the first thing they did was define their terms. And then what? We don't do that anymore. The definitions in our textbooks are so fuzzy today they can mean anything. For example, evolution is commonly defined as change over time. That is not a definition. In science, definitions must be clear and precise and state exactly what is included in that domain and what is not. We don't do that anymore. Great, okay. Thank you. Wow, that time just went too fast. Okay. Words have definitions. Suppose I said we're going to learn apologetics today. What am I talking about? Defending the faith. Where does it say we're to do that in the Bible? 1 Peter 3:15, where else? Jude 3, and 2 Corinthians 10, 4 and 5. And do they apply to just those elite who have studied? No, they apply to all Christians. How about this word? Suppose you're in a session there and a lecture, and you're sitting there, and the presenter up there uses the word thermodynamics. What does that mean? Thermo means heat, dynamics, heat, dynamics.
It means the world is waxing old like a garden.
That's exactly right. In other words, when you use terms, folks, explain them. Don't expect everybody to understand the word thermodynamics. Take your words apart, and sometimes you might even want to give word derivations. How about natural selection? What does natural mean? Without God, without man. Suppose I were to come up here and make this statement. What group wants to be picked on? Do I have a volunteer in a group that wants to volunteer their group? Okay, you volunteered your example. You get the idea now? See, I'm going to get a lot of volunteers now. Okay, here's the question. If you answer it wrong, you're going to be in trouble. Do you believe in evolution?
No.
Has it ever been observed?
You don't believe in change? You don't believe we can change? There we go. Good. What do you mean by evolution? Because if you say, if somebody asks you, do you believe in evolution? You say, yes, you're wrong. You say, no, you're wrong. It's a trick question. What do you mean by evolution? If you're referring to microevolution, which they're taught, I don't like to use the word, but if you're referring to microevolution, which really means variety within kind, I do believe that because we see that all the time. But if you're referring to macroevolution, amoeba to man, I do not accept that. Can you show me any observational evidence for macroevolution that does not require me to use faith?
Yeah, there's variation between cats, and there's variation between dogs, great variation. But macroevolution is true, you should see cogs and dats.
That's right, cogs and dats. See, be careful of words. They're very tricky, aren't they? Suppose I use the word hydrolysis. What am I talking about? What does hydro mean? Water. Hydrolysis means water splitting. If you're doing a lecture, explain your terms. Don't expect people to know these great, big, fuzzy words. How about this one? Ready for a college word? We're going to study epistemology today. Ooh, that's a 25-cent college word. Epistemology, what is that? The study of knowledge. How do you know what you know? There's whole courses in that in college. So be careful of using fancy words. Now let's go to the Bible and creation. What should we be doing? Genesis is a book of beginnings. What does Genesis mean? Beginnings, right. So it's a book about beginnings. Now, here's some interesting things. Genesis 1 through 11, over 2,000 years of Earth history. In other words, Genesis 1 through 11 cover 1/3 of all history of the universe. So if you don't believe it, what have you just given up? All our history. Beginning of space, time, and matter. Beginning of the nation of Israel. Beginning of nations. Beginning of language. Beginning of marriage. Beginning of death and suffering. First promise of the Savior. Beginning of a biblical worldview. Those are just some of the beginnings we find in that book. If you don't believe that book is real history, then what are you going to do with the Bible? You don't have much foundation anymore. So we need to talk about things at the beginning. Look at Jesus in history. John chapter 5, verse 46 and 47. If you believed Moses, you would believe me because Moses wrote about me. What did Moses record? First five books of the Bible. And here's Jesus Christ saying, if you don't believe what Moses wrote, you won't believe him either. And Moses wrote about the creation account, didn't he? Luke 11:51. Abel was a real person. Matthew 24. Noah and the flood. Real history. Matthew 10. Luke 10. Sodom and Gomorrah. Real history. Matthew 12. Jonah. Real history. Colossians 1:16. Jesus Christ, the creator of all things. In other words, if you don't believe the Old Testament, what are you going to believe about the New Testament? Not much, are you? The Bible gives a pretty good verse in there, Psalm 11:3. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Genesis is the foundation. Matter of fact, here's how important it is. The first 3 chapters of Genesis is the reason the entire rest of the Bible had to be written. That's how important this is. After Genesis chapter 3, the entire rest of the Bible is God's plan of redemption. So if you don't believe the first 3 chapters of real history, what are we being redeemed from? That's how important it is. The very first prophecy of Jesus Christ is in Genesis chapter 3. The Bible and time. We look for rules of interpretation. Can I throw another college word out? How about we study hermeneutics? How many heard that one? That's a little more popular, hermeneutics. What is that to study? Written language. How to interpret language. In other words, hermeneutics is a method of interpreting Scripture. And one of those components happens to be context. Keep the words in the context they're given. The word day. Here's your Hebrew lesson, yom. Yom is the Hebrew word for day. What's the plural of yom? Yom. Y-A-M-I-M. We had day with a number. How many times? 410. What does it always mean in the Old Testament? A day. Evening and morning always means a day in the Old Testament, never anything else. Exodus 20 verse 11. God's writing down the Ten Commandments. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all is in them. God wrote that down on the clay tablets himself, 6 days. Genesis 5, the genealogies show the earth is only about 6,000 years old. That's where we get 6,000 from right there. Mark 10 verse 6, Jesus Christ. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. Jesus believed in a young earth, not millions of years. Death and sin. Once you believe in any form that invokes long ages, millions of years, you are now teaching death before sin. Every idea of millions of years being brought into the Bible endorses death before sin, which undermines the entire gospel of Jesus Christ now. So all those accepting theistic evolution, that God used millions of years as some form of evolution, is believing death before sin. And also...
Mike, could you expand on that for me, please?
No. Yes. I just got to get that little weakness in once in a while. Thank you for allowing me to do that.
Yeah.
Expound on death before sin?
Yeah.
Okay. If this earth is old, and millions of years old, what was happening for those millions of years before Adam and Eve? Death, decay, and disease, because that's what the fossil record is. It's a record of dead things, isn't it? And all that would have been happening before the original sin.
Okay.
3D.
Gotcha.
The gap theory endorses that, Dave's theory, progressive creationism, all of them endorse that.
Just like everything else is backwards from the Bible.
Yes.
Most ideas are backwards from the Word of God.
And also, it's saying God called death and decay very good, Genesis 1:31. Did God really call dead animals and dead things very good? No. Because in the Bible it says the works of God are perfect, and creation is the works of God. And he called it very good. The Hebrew word very means exceedingly. His creation was perfect. But yet, we have all these professors out there and a lot of pastors saying, that's not what God really meant. Let me tell you what he said. Does that not sound like the Garden of Eden? It's still here, isn't it? Satan's greatest tactics is not physical persecution. It's distorting the Word of God.
Genesis 5 has all those genealogies, and if you look in where he's talking to Eve, it says, you're not going to die. And in Genesis 5, over and over it says, this is who he was, this is how he lived, and then the very last phrase is, and then he died.
Yes.
And over and over and over again. And so every year in my Bible class, I go through that Satan, his tactic is to be a liar. And then there's that proof right here.
Yes.
He says, you're not going to die to Eve. And then there's a whole chapter. And then he died.
Yes.
This is who he was. And then he died.
Right, because we were made to live forever. Does it say that in the Bible, we were made to live forever? And you were saying yes, weren't you?
Yes.
Exactly right. Because it says in the Bible, and if they could have stayed in the Garden of Eden and eat from the tree of life, they could have lived forever. But we don't live forever. Why? Because of that original sin. So right there in the Bible it does say we were made to live forever.
A Buddhist once asked me, if that's true, then wouldn't the world be very crowded by now?
That's playing God at that point. How do we know during all that time the world would have been overpopulated, or God would have come back and taken us before then? We don't know that. In other words, we're trying to say what God would do, and we don't know that, do we? And that's where they're putting themselves in that
But
position.
this overpopulation business is very overblown. And the fact is, it's very little of the earth that is occupied by people, very little of the land mass. Before the flood, it could have been a larger land mass. We tend to believe biblically it was one continent. And interestingly, if you will take the 7 people that survived the ark and 8, and take the exponent, get it 1/2 of 1% increase in growth for 4,000 years, you come exactly what our population is right now.
Yes, but we also have to add in death and everything else, but
But
it would be more than it is
I mean,
today.
just
Yeah.
to,
But 1/2, 1%, we got to think about more biblically. The population growth rate would have been greater than that.
but if it had been millions of years,
Yeah. Oh,
all
we'd
the
be-
land mass would be occupied with tombstones.
That's right, including Neanderthals. If they lived as long as the evolutionists say,
Yes.
there should have been over 50 billion Neanderthals that have been in existence.
Exactly.
Where are all the
It would be
bones?
bones everywhere.
See, when you do population statistics and growth rates, it does not match evolution at all.
If I can add to his Buddhist question,
Yes,
he has a good answer for the Buddhist because you can tell him that God did all this before the foundation of this earth, this world, because so therefore he knew that man would have fallen. You know?
and you know one of the neat things is, why did God create Satan when he knew all this was going to happen? Well, think of this. If the fall had never occurred, we would never have known God's grace and mercy, would we? So we can look at it that way also. He knew what was going to happen because he knows the beginning from the end. There's a whole movement out there today called the openness of God, which basically teaches God doesn't know the future. And it's very popular in many churches today.
Plus, he does have a,
It's not necessarily any particular denomination. You'll see it more in what we might call the emergent church movement, who deny biblical doctrines.
but it also gives us the concept that God did want us to live forever,
Yes.
and that he has a plan for
Yes.
us.
Right, and now we do have a plan to live forever, but it's in our spirit, not our physical body. Because our physical bodies are corrupted, and God doesn't want corruption in heaven, does he?
But the forever part
Yes.
is still,
How would you like to live to be 1,000 years old today? Absolutely not, because we make prunes look nice, wouldn't we? Because the atmosphere's changed quite a bit. Now let's go into handling objections. We got, now I'm not going to go through all these because we don't have time. That's not the plan in here. We have a whole other course that does that. You need to know how to handle the day-age theory. Somebody comes up and says, oh, the days of creation must have been long periods of time. Let me give you one quick example. 2 Peter 3:8. Day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is the day of the Lord. Doesn't that right there say, right in the Bible, the days were long periods of time? The day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years, the day of the Lord.
Completely out of context.
Completely out of context, exactly. First of all, the full context of 2 Peter 3 has nothing to say about Genesis. It's talking about the end times. God created time, he's not bound by time. And it also has a very key word in there called as, which turns the whole paragraph or sentence into a simile, what you might call a figure of speech, which means it's not meant to be taken literally. But in Genesis chapter 1, the word as is not mentioned anywhere. Genesis chapter 1 is written what we call the narrative form of the Hebrew language, not poetic or simile. That's 2 Peter 3:8. Death of plants. Well, plants don't have physical life. They're never given the breath of life. So biblically, they do not have life. Biologically, we give them life, but the Bible never gives them life. Gap theory. In our basic creation training, I have about 6 to 8 pages just on the gap theory. Going through all their supposed proof text, how to refute that. And every one of these, again, believes in what? Death before sin. Need to handle the framework hypothesis. Oh, the Hebrew language is very poetic, therefore Genesis shouldn't be taken literally. Well, the Hebrew language can be written in poetic style, but it can also be written in narrative style, and you can tell the difference. And Genesis 1 is written in the narrative form, not poetic form. Genesis 2:4. Whoa. They will use that against you, because the word day is used there. In the day. And it does not mean a literal day, right there in Genesis 2:4. However, it's the object of a preposition. It's in a prepositional phrase, and in that case, in the Hebrew, it's not meant to be taken literally. See, language study is very important here. But people are using anything they can to do away with a literal six-day creation. And then dating methods. Now, I'm not talking boy-girl here. I'm talking rocks and fossils. Some of you may date fossils, but that's, I'm going to bring that up. But all these dating methods are all based on assumptions, and they don't teach these to our students. And we've shown these assumptions are false. These are things we need to be teaching in our classes. The Genesis flood. The Bible and Genesis flood. Why is the flood an important issue? It's going to have to do with death before sin. If the flood was a local flood, then where did all the fossils come from? Over millions and millions of years. That implies death before sin. But if the flood was a worldwide flood, then they're all laid down in predominantly one time period. This is why a worldwide flood is so important. It deals with the foundation of the gospel. Word uses. The Genesis flood in geology. The geology overwhelmingly supports a worldwide flood. We can see that in Mount St. Helens. The flood in the fossil record. Do you know the fossil record is a great tool for creationists? Now, I do the fossil record. I don't get into any technology or anything. You don't have to go into, oh, this fossil had this part and that part. No, you can keep the fossil record very simple and defeat evolution real easily. Now, you don't have to get into all the detailed science when you're doing these lectures, even teaching in school. You don't have to. Just keep the basics there, and you'll put a lot of confidence in these students. Cambrian explosion, fossil graveyards, seashells on top of mountain ranges. That's what you need to teach. How did these seashells get up on top of Mount Everest and they didn't have legs to walk up there? That's what you need to teach. Keep it simple. You don't have to hide behind all the detailed science. They can learn that later. But the first thing we need to teach them is confidence in God's Word. Show them that God did give us the evidence. And His Word is true from beginning to end. And the Bible does have answers. There really was a worldwide flood. And it's the reason we have all these fossils out here today. Let me show you some examples. Top of Mount Everest, seashells. Fossil graveyards where you find hundreds and thousands of fossils all buried and mangled together from different ecological zones. You know we find dinosaurs buried with many different kinds of creatures, including mammals? You won't learn that in school, public schools, will you? But we find that over and over again. We find dinosaur graveyards. Sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, or 100 dinosaurs all buried together. That doesn't happen by natural processes, folks. You know, when you become a fossil, you have to be buried rapidly. And we find all these fossils buried in, guess what? Sediments laid down by water. Isn't that amazing? We find these fossil graveyards all over the world. Fish with mammals, seashells with mammals, and lizards. They don't all live in the same place, so how do they all get in the same place? How about a worldwide flood?
Frozen woolly mammoths in a permafrost.
Yes.
Died by drowning.
Yes. Yeah. And there was a whale graveyard where they found at least 20 completely intact whales. That had to happen rapidly. Their explanation they gave us so silly. Oh, these whales got isolated and died and became fossils. That's not how it happens, folks. See, we can keep it simple. Don't try and lead your students in all this deep scientific thinking. They're not ready for this. Now, you can do that in other classes, and you do that as they come along, but let's get the basic foundation laid first, the confidence in God's Word. Then we have the science. Understanding the basic foundational questions like, could you tell me where the original matter came from to create that Big Bang? Because we all know from basic good logic, from nothing, nothing comes. Or how did life originate? That is a killer to evolutionists. Because our best scientists in the world cannot even create one single small biological protein. Not even one biological protein we can't get. Or, how about, where did the dinosaurs come from? You know what we find out there? I've been to many, many museums all over the world. You know what I find in museums? Dinosaurs. Look at all these books. What I see pictures of dinosaurs. What am I not seeing? The thousands of transitions that led up to the dinosaurs. They're not in one single museum I've seen in this world. Nowhere. It's as if, and this might surprise you, it's as if They were created after their kind. See, these are what I call power questions. Where did the matter come from, the great universe? How did life originate? Where did dinosaurs come from? Simple power questions that puts the other person on the defense. Then we have dating methods. We need to train our students about the assumptions. You don't have to get into all the detailed description of how this works. Make sure they understand there's assumptions. Make sure they understand these are not consistent at all. We might see consistency in the textbooks, but if you've ever been to a lab, they're not even close to consistent. You can take one rock dated by 4 different methods and come up with 4 different ages, ranging hundreds of millions of years difference in age. But we never get taught that. All we see is the date in the book. They're very inconsistent. Carbon-14 is one of my favorite ones. That's where I've done a lot of work. Carbon-14 is a great testimony to a very young Earth. Powerful testimony for a young Earth. I can teach carbon-14 dating to a 6th grader and they can understand it. That's the challenge for you teachers. To be able to take this information, not over detail, but take the basic information and teach it to the younger children. That's the role of a teacher. Take something kind of detailed and bring it down to their level. And fossil record made easy again. Then we come to apologetics. See, this course is not about teaching creation and evolution, just showing you some of the things we need to be teaching in there. Apologetics. 1 Peter 3:15, Jude 3, practice apologetics. Here's some questions we need to make sure students are not in. Junior hires must understand these things. Who did Cain marry? How could Adam name all the animals one day? How could the first 3 days be days without the sun? How could Noah fit all those animals on the ark? Those are questions they need to know how to answer. Why? Because this gives them confidence in God's Word, rather than letting the world teach them the answers, which drives them away from God's Word. Our casualty rate is over 70% today. That's how many of our students are leaving the church, because we forgot about teaching. We forgot about the fact we're in a war, and this is a vicious war. The world wants our children. Are you willing to give them over to the world? That means we have to do our job. And as I said earlier, our hope is not in the next generation. Our hope is that this generation will train the next generation. Then we can have hope in them. So we have to do our job first. Apologetics. Recognizing logical fallacy. And ad hominem, what is that one?
Against the man.
Against the man. In other words, I'm going to attack you and not the argument. Oh, you creationists, you don't believe in any good science at all. Oh, as I've attacked you, haven't I? Or anybody that doesn't believe in evolution is absolutely stupid. That's attacking the person, not the argument. We have other ones called equivocation, using the same word in a sentence for 2 different meanings. Or bifurcation, either or fallacy, giving you only 2 choices when in fact there's 3. I love it when I get phone calls from about politics, because they're doing a questionnaire, they're trying to pigeonhole you into the answer they want. They'll give you 2 choices. And right away say, no, those are 2 choices. Can I give you a 3rd choice? Or they might say, I love it when they say, what race are you? I say, do you know there's only one race? It's called the human race. And I go through the whole lecture. You know what? They'll never call you back again. They're going to call me. They're going to get a lecture. And I'm very polite to them. And I'll try and keep them on there as long as I can, too. And then asking questions. Jesus and Mark 11. They challenge Jesus. What does Jesus say? Well, let me ask you a question. If you cannot answer my question, then I'm not going to answer yours. I do that quite a bit. Do you believe in evolution? Example. This is what I got from a secular university. Secular university. A gentleman stood up, and he had a Bible with him. And he read right from the Bible. People living to be 900 years old. Then he asked me this question. Do you really believe people live to be 900 years old? I think he was astounded by my answer. Because I said, yes, don't you? Kind of stunned him for a moment. And then he said, no. I said, why don't you believe that? Because it's never been observed. Boy, did he just step in it then. He stepped knee deep or shoulder deep in Brussels sprouts. It doesn't get much worse than that, does it, folks? You know Brussels sprouts are evil? I think I can prove that. Because what is a Brussels sprout? It's a deformed cabbage, isn't it? And there could have been no deformities until after the fall. Now, I want to let you know, that's just a personal opinion. Personal opinion. That's called bunny trail. So my response to him after he said, since it's never been observed, I can't believe it. And I asked him, did you ever observe the origin of life? Guess what I just caught him in? A contradiction in his belief system. He believes that life originated by natural processing, even though nobody's ever observed that. But he's unwilling to believe people live to be 900 years because nobody's observed that. He has a contradiction, and everybody caught him in it too. Even his fellow people there saw what just happened. And it ruined the whole conversation for him. That's the power of learning to ask questions. Guess where I got my technique from? Jesus Christ, right there. Now, you don't want to use that all the time, but there are very appropriate times. Well, let me ask a question. That came up last night. The gentleman did not like my answer, and that was too bad. They asked me about the distant starlight. How can these galaxies are millions of light years away, how could that light reach us in only 6,000 years? Well, my first answer is usually this. I'll answer that question as soon as you tell me where your light sources came from, called stars. You know they can't do that? They cannot tell me where the stars come from. And I know they're bluffs. No one's ever seen a star evolve. So why should I answer their question how the distant starlight got here if they can't tell me where the light sources came from? No light, no, there's no stars. We don't have the light coming here, do we? Now, we do have possible answers. They can be right or wrong. But you know what? I also point out they have bigger problems than we do with the distant starlight. Those are the things we need to be teaching. And again, it's not super rocket science on this. Keep it simple. Apologetics. Understanding worldviews, presuppositions. Does God exist? Show me any evidence God exists. In our advanced apologetics course, a day and a quarter class, I have 5 very powerful evidences for the existence of God. The moral argument for God. I love it, that one there, when they tell me God is evil. Moral relativism, absolutes. Moral relativism, again, is a self-defeating philosophy. As soon as they make a statement, they're setting themselves up as the lawgiver. And they're in trouble there. There are no absolutes. You believe in evolution. All those types of things. No real scientist believes. They're setting themselves up as the lawgiver. And you call that into question right there. Why are you Christians so intolerant? Again, what did we say to that one? Anybody remember? Why are you intolerant of my alleged intolerance? How do you answer questions like that? You call them on it to show that their worldview is not consistent. That's the biggest area you can get to. Go down to the worldview level and show the worldview is not consistent with reality. It's full of contradictions. So give an example of critical thinking question. Number 1.
You know that's true.
Number 1. How do you know it's true? Okay. Number 2.
Has it been observed?
Has it ever been observed? Number 3.
Do you have any assumptions?
Are you making any assumptions? Good. Are we having a pattern here? You get it, you kind of get it after I get your attention. You look it up and you have it just like that. State 2 reasons for holding to a literal 6-day creation. A number with the word day and evening and morning. There's 2 simple ones right there. There's about 7 or 8 very simple ones there. State 4 areas that should be covered when teaching creation evolution. Well, we should cover what the Bible has to say, shouldn't we? The age issue is very important to cover because the age issue makes a difference. What happens when we add millions of years? What does it mean to add millions of years into the Bible? Death before sin. Exactly. It's a big issue. So we need to cover what the Bible has to say. We need to cover the death before sin issue. We need to cover some of the basic science. We need to cover critical thinking skills. Very important critical thinking skills. That's where we had this called the lifelong learning tools. This next week, I'll be in Dallas doing the state homeschool convention. I'll be doing 4 talks. Guess which one of them is? critical thinking skills that dismantle evolution. That's one of the talks. I'm also going to do my patriotic talk there. It's a very powerful patriotic talk. It goes through the history of American warfare, the price that was paid for our freedoms. It's full of music. I programmed all the music in there. Not too many dry eyes in the audience. Then I also go through America's greatest war she's ever been in, and we're in it right now. It's called the War for the Heart and Soul of the Nation. I go through that description. Changing our history, our morality, and our religious basis, our biblical foundation. All three of those are being attacked. And I go into that. State why Christians should learn and practice apologetics. 1 Peter 3:15 and Jude 3. It's a biblical command. And that brings us to chapter 5. Because all it takes is one person in there who calls themselves a scientist, takes over the class and starts teaching long ages, and uses all their alleged proofs. That causes great damage in the class, great damage in many people's Christian walk. So don't think you can go in there and teach creation just because you have some knowledge. You better anticipate the questions you're going to get asked before they're asked. That's what you need to do. I look forward to the Q&A time. I really look forward to it. Even in secular universities, because I know what they're about doing there. But I look forward to it. But I never go into that without a lot of prayer. Because I don't want to rely on me. So our topics. The purpose of Q&A. Preparation. Handling the hostile question. Our challenge. State a method of preparing for a Q&A time that will follow your presentation. So what's the purpose of Q&A? It gives a chance to respond to the concerns of the audience. Because in an hour presentation, you can only cover so much. And what is the danger? Putting too much in there. You can only cover so much in an hour. And you're going to get questions from all different aspects of creation and evolution. Don't think they're just going to ask questions on what you covered. You're going to get questions from across the board. So if you don't know anything about geology or astronomy, you're going to get in some trouble there. Unless you preface it, we're only going to have questions about the topic covered tonight. Then you can have a little more control over that. But I usually open it up to anything. It's an opportunity to learn more about your audience and give them a chance to see you think on your feet.
Mike, do you have like a list or something of some of the questions that you kind of, that have been asked, and generally speaking that
It would be awful long.
Yeah, well, that's why, I know for you, you probably have, but I just wondered if...
I can ask about the days of creation. I can get into that. Big one is the distant starlight. It's across the board. Every area of science. I even get questions about the things that don't even concern creation evolution. Like, Mike, what do you think about the Nephilim? And what I will do is answer that question very neutrally. I'll say, you know, there's two prominent opinions about it. Any more questions? Why do I do that? Well, I have a very strong opinion on it. But where I am in that church, they may teach one particular view. And I don't want to go against what the pastor says. Both sides had some pretty good arguments on that one. And I have my view, but I'm not going to give it there. Or, Mike, what do you think about something on eschatology? When's Jesus coming back? I'll say he's coming back, and we're closer than any other generation. Any other questions? There are certain things you want to avoid, because it's not the topic, and you can get yourself in big trouble there. So be very careful. Be careful of giving opinions. That's a danger. You gain credibility or lose your credibility, how well you do in a Q&A time. So make sure you're well versed before you go in there and teach this. Great places to start are small Sunday school classes, or maybe a home Bible study. Those are great places to start getting your credibility. Doing some chat there. Jesus responded to the chief priests, scribes, and elders. What did he say again? Well, you asked me a question, I'm going to ask you a question. If you can't answer my question, I'm not going to answer yours. Preparation. Start by anticipating questions. If you're doing a talk, on a biblical talk on the days of creation, you better be very prepared for somebody to come up and ask questions about the dating methods. So you need to understand the assumptions used in the dating methods and that they're not consistent. Or you're going to lose credibility in that class, and you might have the class taken away from you. You better be very prepared if somebody comes up and says, well, what about the gap theory? You better know everything about the gap theory. See, in our basic creation training class, what I do is I go through all the evidences why a day is a day. Then I go into all the counter arguments. See, if we don't go into the counter arguments and how to answer the counter arguments, all I'm doing is setting everybody up for failure. We have to go to that level. It's one thing to know the information, but you have to know the next level down. Anticipate the questions you might get and have those ready to give. Or you can even diffuse them in your talk so they don't even come up. Your approach counts. How you treat those people in that audience makes a big difference. Do not get into an argument. You might have, I've actually had open debates, spontaneous debates in situations. That's okay. Sometimes I'll do it, sometimes I won't. Just depends on the situation. But do not belittle the person, even if they're attacking you. You will lose at that point. You show that person respect. Even if they are attacking you, trying to ruin your credibility, you will show them respect. Because what is your position there? You're there as a witness for Jesus Christ. Don't ever forget that. You will not strike out in anger. Approach the challenge with a positive mind and analyze what the actual need is. Now, there's a lot of people think science is the issue. No, it is not. It is the heart, the issue. And when I get into debates or big, long discussions, I'm going to try and get that discussion down to the worldview level as fast as I can. Then I have total control over the conversation. That's the deeper stuff. That takes a little more training to do. Many times the best answer is short and simple, concise answer. Don't ramble on. Now again, if you're in an open audience, you've got a lot of people out there who may have questions. And if you let a question go on and on and on, you're sitting there answering it for 15 minutes, guess what just happened to your audience? You've lost them. Because you already finished your discussion. They want to get out of there sometimes. They want to go home. It's late. Now in a classroom, you have more control, don't you? Because you're in control of the time. You're in control of what you want your students to learn. So in a classroom, you can give sometimes more elaborate and use it as a teaching tool at that time. So the situation would be slightly different then. Also, Q&A time. Make sure you hear and understand the full question. Don't interrupt them. Unless, and I have this happen, they want to give their lecture. They don't have a question. They want to give, I'll stop them right there. I'll say, what is your question? If they don't want to give me a question, I'll stop them and say, okay, over here. This is not their time to give a lecture. So you have to stop it there. Sometimes somebody will say, well, I have 3 questions. Well, let's start with one, and I'll give somebody else an opportunity, and I'll get back to you. You don't want one person monopolizing everything there. And make sure you understand their question. How do you do that? You do what? You repeat it back. Sometimes you might need to rephrase it because they don't know how to ask it. I get that quite a bit. I don't know how to ask this. And they'll start getting something out. Then I'll try and help them with the question. The reason for that is I want everybody to understand what they're really trying to get at there. I want to be careful that I really understand what they're saying and get that back to the audience. And a lot of that deals with distant starlight a lot of times. They really don't know how to ask that question. So I'll rephrase it in something way everybody can fully understand. Then we have, you may have to read between the lines to get to the real issue. I had a professor at one of my lectures, didn't even know how to ask a right question. And she had her students in there. The students apparently didn't like her very much. And they were all looking at her. So finally I had to help her, and I asked the question for her. And then I answered it. And I asked her a question. She could not answer the question. She didn't even know what it was about. And she ran out of there, and her students followed her. They did not like, they were after almost to go after her. They did not like her a whole lot. because she was teaching straight evolutionism to these students. They didn't particularly care for it for some reason. And they were probably happy to see that for the first time, she didn't get away with her bluffs. You're going to get all sorts of things. You're going to get angry people. I've had one person, after I finished the lecture, we had 2 lectures that night. After the first lecture, went back, they were having some refreshments. A man approached me and said, "Everything you said is wrong." My response was this: "Can you be real precise and tell me just one thing that I said wrong?" And his answer was this: "If you're going to be argumentative, we have nothing to talk about." And ran out of there. You're going to get a lot of things. I had one person challenge me from the audience. They answered his question and asked him a question back. He was never been used to being challenged. He just got up, went screaming, yelling out of the classroom, never came back. He didn't want to be challenged. I found many evolutionists do not like to be challenged. They would rather challenge you. Why don't they want to be challenged? They don't have the answers. Sometimes the toughest questions come from people who agree with you. So make sure you answer with gentleness and respect. Don't bluff. All you got to do is bluff, and you're going to lose all your credibility. If you don't know it, just admit you don't know it. But once you get to a certain point, it doesn't matter if you don't know things. Because people who have PhDs in biology know a whole lot more biology than I do. They might talk about something I don't know anything about, but I know how to diffuse that very easily. Sir, that's very interesting. I've not heard of that. But how does that help you if you don't know how life originated? See, we never get there if you can't explain how the first cell evolved by naturalistic processes. Without that first cell, we don't have any Darwinian evolution, do we? So I can diffuse those kind of questions. Yes, I don't know the biology he knows, but I can still handle it, because without that first cell, the whole idea of Darwinian evolution is resting on what? A faith issue. Types of situations to beware. People who take over the questioning time. People who want to do a mini speech. And I get those. And sometimes there are other creationists. They just want to give their ideas. This is not their time. You have to stop them. People with their own agenda and ask a question to promote themselves. You got to stop that right there. If, sir, do you have a question? Ma'am, do you have a question? We can get back to this after the Q&A time. People who ask a question that you covered during your presentation. Don't say, "Oh, we already covered that." You might want to say that. We did cover that. Or it might be a time, maybe other people didn't get it in there also. It might be a time to go back and reiterate that piece because it's that important. So don't just shut that down. Look at the opportunity. Look at people's faces. Read your audience. And then there's the totally irrelevant question. It has nothing to do with what you're talking about. Just say, "Sir, that's not where we're hitting here. We can talk about that at another time. Right now we're talking about the creation evolution issue." Then there's the hostile question. The best way to herd them off is to consider what parts of your presentation could lead to disagreement. In other words, pre-plan these things. You may be able to address these by embedding what amounts to a rebuttal to their presentation or their question before it even comes up. I call this neutralizing your opponent before they can even ask the question. Powerful tool. Anticipate what somebody might say, put it in your presentation, then they can't even ask the question. Really silly. Don't criticize the question or get right to the issues. Don't criticize them. Don't be hostile to them. And stick to the facts, to what you know. Be very careful of opinions. And don't say, "Well, it's my opinion." Take it back to what the Bible has to say. Use that as your authority. Don't be up there saying, "I believe." Go back to, this is what the Bible teaches. And then you may follow your question with a question that can cause doubt about what they said. I do this quite often during Q&A time, especially in a hostile situation. They'll ask a question, I'll answer the question, but I'll answer it and put a follow-on question to them. And it really frustrates them because they have a hard time answering these because their professor never taught them this information. So So there's all sorts of tactics you can use. Even in a classroom, Christian schools, you're going to get students in there that have a lot of questions. And these may be very legitimate questions. They just want to find answers to these. You know, you won't have answers to all of them, but after a while, you'll have a lot of answers, won't you? A hostile audience. Anticipate what types of questions might be asked. This is a very good one. Know your stuff. That's the technical term, folks. Don't go in there half knowledgeable. You're going to do a lot of damage to Christianity. Learn the value of asking good questions, probing questions, foundational questions. Learn to recognize and respond to logical fallacies. There's a whole book out written by Dr. Jason Lau called Discerning Truth. It is an excellent book. Why is it excellent? It's thin. And Dr. Jason Lau, PhD in astrophysics, good creationist, gives lots of examples of logical fallacies used by evolutionists. It's a great book because it has many examples in it. Don't worry about memorizing all the names of things. Just learn to recognize logical fallacies. They're used by evolutionists all the time. Anybody give me an example of a logical fallacy? Okay, that's circular reasoning. That is a logical fallacy. But how about, we went through one, ad hominem, the name calling.
Leaving the issue and going to the individual.
Say which one?
Leaving the issue and going to the individual.
Right, that's ad hominem, leaving the issue and going to ad hominem. How about, go ahead.
Populist. Everybody believes this. So
Yeah,
you should-
everybody believes this. Yes, that's called the bandwagon. Everybody watches this show. Or you need to buy this because everybody else is getting it. Or everybody believes that women should have a choice about what to do with their body. That deals with the abortion issue. How do you answer that? Let's try this. Let me do, well, we did that group. Let's do this group over here. Why are you Christians against a woman's right to choose? Ooh. This is what I teach. This is what we need to know. In my creation, and I'm coming out with a new DVD in a couple of months on the sanctity of human life. If you want to find out something about it now, I have a 30-minute video free on our website. We just did it. Comes out in about a week. This is a critical issue, folks. Okay, how do you answer that question? Number one, we're not against a woman's right to choose her own future. We are against a woman's so-called right to terminate another human being's future. And we are for a woman's right to understand all the issues and the truth. That's how we answer that one. So they're stunned with it. See, we should never lose this issue. We should never lose the abortion issue. But yet we keep doing it because we're not educated here. Every youth pastor in this country should learn how to teach this. But they don't want to. They're basically ignorant on this issue. Because they want to play a guitar and build relationships. Whatever happened to teaching good, sound doctrine? Now, I've met some very good youth pastors, but predominantly, they're very untrained for teaching our students. Very untrained. They're killing us. We need to get them well trained, and it's not happening in our universities, so somebody's got to do it. And this is an important issue, the sanctity of human life. We need to have teachers all over this country start doing some training. Folks, we got a window of time right here because we're making some victories, but that's going to end in a couple years. If we don't take advantage of it, folks, it's our fault for all these human deaths. Unless the churches wake up and start teaching these issues, there's going to be the continued slaughter of millions of babies. When will the church step up to what they're supposed to do? We need youth pastors trained. We need somebody in every church, every Christian school who knows how to teach this the right way. They must understand what the Bible has to say, and they must understand we have all the science on our side. See, it is a biological fact that human life begins at conception. Anything else is nothing more than an emotional opinion. And we can prove that. So why do we keep losing this argument? We're not trained. Learn to recognize presuppositions. Those are some of the things you need to do. So state a method of preparing for Q&A. A good method is anticipate the questions you're going to be asked.